This particular song, "You'll Be Back" from the Hamilton musical, oh my goodness, it can cause such an ignition of anger in me at times, and then also just baffles me at others. So, for those of you all who haven't been able to catch up, basically, my name is Air, and I'm doing a full commentary from the point of view of human rights and human trafficking as a survivor, as a thriver on one of the most phenomenal pieces of artwork I've ever encountered when it comes to relating to human rights and the fight for freedom by Lin-Manuel, by the entire cast, and just Jonathan, the original Broadway cast. It's just amazing. So I am a super fan of this musical. I listen to it all the time on Spotify, as well as I love to watch it on television. The Broadway, I I'll have a confession. I've never been able to see it in person, and it is definitely on my bucket list because I will probably be super and just on a soulful level impacted by watching them perform live. So, this particular song, though, is directly from The King. And when I imagine this song being played out, I wonder if Lin-Manuel was similar in the sake of like, what would it be like to be on top of the quote unquote world at that time? Because that mentality has to be a little bit off their rocker. It has to be so caught up in the power dynamic that you're not actually seeing the reality of life. Or perhaps you do see it and you are just that much of a psychopath or that much of a sociopath that you cannot even register what you do to people. That to me is the mindset of traffickers, especially traffickers at the top of the rings, at the top of the food chain of this white collar organized crime. So just that mentality is something that if you're going to fight human trafficking, you almost have to tap into how does the criminal think? Like, what actually leads somebody to be this deranged? And as somebody that studies psychotherapy, as someone that is working on master's and eventually a doctorate in the practice of both Western and Eastern medicines, I'm fascinated that people actively wish to do the type of harm that they do in these cases to others. I can't be unbiased just based off of my personal history with this issue, but I can say that I'm not sure I will ever be able to fully access that mind. And I will be honest with you, I don't think I should. I don't think that you have to have a full understanding on why people do the things that they do in order to have an understanding of what's right and wrong. So, with that, getting into the song itself, You'll Be Back, the king is singing, and he's just not getting a clue here. He goes, "The price of my love, not a price that you're willing to pay." You cry. Immediately, we're seeing some dynamics of like, what? And then he goes, "Remember, we made it an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Like, remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man." And this is something that I've seen traffickers do to victims is to make them so dependent on the trafficker that they can't really escape. They may tie money or self-esteem or self-concept or even identity to the circumstance that they're stuck in and feel like they don't have the ability to even make choices for themselves. They are owned as if they are property. And this is exactly the dynamic that the king is setting up here. Is like, you are basically property. I own you. And that only gets further cemented in his words as the song goes on. But one thing I want to bring up before we go into the next verse is the "you'll be back" verse. Several individuals that are able to escape their environment, whether it's abusers or trafficking victims, don't necessarily have the resources that they need to be able to move forward and heal and repair and restore their lives. This is why there are so many nonprofits out there dedicated to rehabilitation. And I mentioned earlier in episodes that rehabilitation is where my deepest heart is for the restoration of survivors, moving them into thrivers. That is where I think so much more focus needs to go to be able to start breaking the negative feedback loop of human trafficking. We pour a lot into awareness and prevention. In fact, it can be argued that this whole entire podcast series is dedicated to awareness and education and prevention of human trafficking. Whereas I fully believe that if we go and we invest in the survivors and move them towards becoming thrivers, that is where we can trust that the impact will be made of how society views human trafficking survivors, and also shed a lot of light on what happens to make these things occur. It was through people empowering me and investing in me and uplifting me that I was able to rise like air, pun intended, to be able to have the voice and the strength and the foundation to where I could turn around and put my hands back into the fire to be able to uplift others. I was strong enough. Now, that took a very long time, but also I did majority of it in the beginning on my own with no resources. So having resources available early on would definitely impact the velocity or the ability to move faster here in recovery as far as my life, but also other survivors, other victims. So I will always go on that soapbox of we need more therapists out there. We need more resources to be able to build foundations for survivors to not feel like they have to go back to their traffickers, commit suicide, or feel like they are isolated or alone. So the "you'll be back" is very dark. And it was very interesting how Lin-Manuel decided to make this such a uplifting, peppy type of song, because it comes out very psychotic in the way that he presents it. And this type of psychosis in such a messed up scenario is probably the best way that makes it digestible. But I don't want to take away from the fact that, like, this is a dark frame of reference. So you'll be back soon. You'll see. You'll remember you belong to me. Traffickers use those statements, if not that exact statement, all the time. You belong to me. You are possession. You are property. You are mine. Now, if it's like a romantic setting and it's like a cute, like, oh, you're mine type of thing between like a boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, whole different dynamic. We're not talking about that dynamic. We're talking about the property transactional dynamic of you belong to me. Time will tell. And he's giving more of this manipulation tactic of, remember that I served you well. So like when you are having those depressing thoughts, when you don't think that you can go forward, you're having the PTSD, you're not able to get the resources you need to move forward, don't worry, you'll be back because you'll remember how good you had it here. And that is really, really dark in the sense of some survivors do fall into that. And they fall back into the victim part of human trafficking because they get so caught up in the fact of, at least I had a roof over my head, at least I had food around, but you didn't have your freedom. Whereas if they do not get the proper resources, will fall into the fact of like, I don't know where to live. I don't know how to support myself. I don't have those type of resources unless somebody is able to kind of come alongside me for a moment. So whenever I am at the point that I feel like I have the resources, I can move forward on working with my mental health and my emotional health and being able to actually understand what all has transpired. But in those core months, especially those first 3 months, it really is still the victim era. It's not the survivor era. I wouldn't say a human trafficking survivor really gets into that era until they see that they're actually safe. And I mean safe physically, mentally, and emotionally. And that most likely is going to take between 5 to 9 months afterwards. And you got to wait until the night terrors stop, and you got to wait until you can actually be touched by another like human being again, like not even in a sexual way, but like a handshake. And that mentality shift doesn't really happen until you have those core resources. So he takes a super dark turn right in, the second verse here. And it goes, "We have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love." Human trafficking occurs in one of three ways. It occurs through fraud, coercion, or force. And he very much is pointing out what we would have as force, the actual kidnapping, the actual endangerment, the gun, the sword, whatever you want to call it, the forceful actions. Then he starts singing, da 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 da. And it's as if it's a Tuesday for him and that this isn't someone's life. So he's basically trying to manipulate once again, gaslight in the fact of like, okay, you say our love is draining and you can't go on, but you'll be the one complaining. Like you're going to be the one that hurts, not me. How could I hurt? Like I'm better. I'm sweet. I'm, amazing. You're supposed to be my sweet, submissive subject, my loyal, royal subject. Like you own to me. Like that manipulation that happens not only with human trafficking traffickers, but it also happens in a lot of abuse. And human trafficking is abuse. It's human abuse. So he keeps going on, basically saying, I'm going to be upset, but like your life is going to be ruined if you don't come back. And this last real line before he starts singing da 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 again is dark. This might be one of the darkest lines in the entire play. But the king is making it known how he truly feels about these people. Traffickers are making it clearly known how they see their property, their victims. He says, "I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love." Now, going back to the three ways that someone is trafficked, you have force, coercion, and fraud. This would fall under coercion. Many victims will stay in the circumstances that they do not want to be in because they are terrified of what will happen to the people that they love. For instance, a woman will stay with her trafficker if the trafficker also has a child of the woman. She will go and do things to other women or other children or other men that she would not do. She will commit crimes to be able to protect the child. She will continue to be trafficked because the trafficker might say that he'll do it to her child. And what really adds a level of darkness to this is many times that child is a result of the trafficking, of the assaults themselves. It is very clear that the king has no respect, no love, nothing positive of healthy dynamics to his subjects. And that is in direct parallel to how traffickers treat their victims. I know without a shadow of a doubt that in this particular commentary, my shot hit because this is point blank.